Morning, Southpoint Church. Wow, we've got a beautifully full room this morning. Please take a seat. So, good morning. My name is Collette, for those of you who don't know me, and welcome to Southpoint Church, and welcome to this wonderful Women's Day weekend, and happy Women's Day to all the women out there. I hope that give them a clap. I hope that you had a wonderful day yesterday celebrating. So, for Women's Month, we are currently in this amazing series called Godly Girls and Wild Women, and I just love it. I think that is the most amazing title ever. And when the leadership were planning the different series coming up for the year, I took one look at that one and I said, right, this one is for the women. So last week we had Tamar, who did this incredible job of introducing Sarah to us. It was just so good. And for the next 3 weeks coming, we've got 3 other ladies from our congregation who are in leadership, and they are going to be bringing you the other godly girls and wild women. And I must say, I just can't wait. But as Kyle said this morning, this sermon comes with a disclaimer, and that is, it is PG-13. Bet you never had a sermon start with that before. If there are any kids in the room who belong in Wonderland or Upstreet or Transit, I strongly suggest that you take them to their respective environments or face some very tricky questions over your Sunday lunch. In fact, actually, when I met with John Virgo and Matthew Murray yesterday, they said, maybe we should make this R-rated, but I think we're going to stick with PG-13. So, now that I have your attention, which I'm sure I do, let's begin. So, every family has their skeletons in the closet. Every family has that scandal which everybody knows about, but nobody speaks about. So, I was a fresh-faced, young and excited 23-year-old, newly engaged to this awesome, handsome stud of an architect sitting in the front row over here. And he had swept me off my feet and rocked my world, from his sports car to his ambition to this life that we were going to build together. And I had known that I wanted to be an interior designer since I was about 13 or 14. And so in my mind, to marry an architect was like this perfect fit. And here I was, living my dream. And I got on really well with Sean's family, and Sean got on really well with my family, and everything was hunky-dory, until one day I was cornered by Sean's beloved Granny Bubbles. Now, Granny Bubbles had an integral part in raising Sean, and he absolutely loved her. But Granny Bubbles got hold of me in a corner and whispered, I have something to tell you that may change your mind as to whether you want to marry into this family. Wow. Well, that was unexpected. So I duly sat down, I think more out of intrigue than concern. I duly sat down with our dear Granny Bubbles, and we had a cup of tea, and I leaned in as she whispered, because these things are always shared in whispers, and she said, I just need to let you know that if you marry into this family, you are marrying into an illegitimate line. Although between you and me, she used a worse word than that. I was quite taken aback. And she said, in good conscience, I need to let you know that this is what the situation is, so that you can decide whether it is something that you are able to live with or not. So, as much as I was deeply touched that she had entrusted this deep family skeleton with me, because it was a deep thing for her. She was, I got this wrong in the first service. She married the grandson of this shameful line. What had happened was another young, fresh-faced Adendorff had married a man, had a child with him, only to discover that he actually had a family and children and a wife living in Europe. So she went on her own, reverted to her maiden name, and raised this child. And she'd entrusted this family skeleton with me, and it was very, very personal. But it really got me thinking, at what point is there redemption from our shame? And because redemption is not a word that we use very frequently, I thought I'd just give us the definition, particularly in the Old Testament version of it, because that's what we're going to be looking at today. In the Old Testament, redemption signifies being saved from a state of bondage, oppression, or loss through the payment of a price or a ransom. It signifies rescue and deliverance and atonement. So, at what stage are we redeemed from being whispered in little dark corners? At what stage are we redeemed? And today, as we have celebrated Women's Day yesterday and looking at Women's Month this whole month, we are very, very acutely aware of the gender-based violence that is present in not only the world, but in our very much loved country here. And so it felt fit that today we are going to talk about a redeemed woman who was abused and yet was a part of the golden thread of the lineage of Jesus. You see, the Bible, it's not sanitized. It's not clean. But you know what? Neither is my life, and I'm sure neither is your life. And what's good about that is it makes it relatable. You see, people often come to the Bible with the expectation that they're going to be led by still, still waters and pastures green, which, yes, you will find. But if you happen to randomly open your Bible, particularly to the Old Testament, there is a very good chance that you are going to encounter a very disturbing story. But this is actually a good thing. And do you know why? Because God is a realist. God does not shy away from disturbing things, and that is a huge comfort to us. The Bible is filled with imperfect and sometimes downright scandalous stories. And this should encourage us because we've all got stories. We've all got things that have happened to us or that we have done that we're not proud of. And in this way, the Bible actually becomes relatable, even if it's just to say, oh my word, he or she did that. I didn't do anything that bad. I'm okay. It becomes relatable. But before we dive into our wild woman number 2, I think the key to understanding these stories is to understand the context in which these stories took place. I think if we were to approach most of these stories with a 21st century thinking, they don't really make a lot of sense. So what I'm going to do this morning is I'm going to take you through a little bit of a journey, and we are going to read a story, and we're going to get some context, and then we're going to draw some conclusions out of it. But strap yourself in, people, because we're in for a wild ride. Are you ready? All right. So today's wild woman comes from a story of a family. And not just any family, but the family that God chose to bless the whole world with. So we are going to start off with a family tree. And this is going to give you the context and the lineage of what we're talking about and the different events that happened. Can we have my slide? I think we're going to put it on the side screens as well, because it actually turned out a little bit small. Do I have slides? Not slides. No. Okay, I'm going to wing it then. So, we were introduced last week to Abraham and Sarah. Okay, so we were introduced to Sarah. So there was Abraham and Sarah. They had a son called Isaac, who had a son called Jacob. Now, Jacob had 12 sons. He was very prolific. So we are going to look at 2 of these sons. We are going to look at Judah, and we're going to look at Joseph. Now, some of you may know Joseph not from the Bible, but from that incredible Andrew Lloyd Webber musical, Joseph in His Technicolor Dreamcoat. Ellie and I went to go and see that, my daughter and I, at the beginning of the year at Theatre in the Bay, and it was incredible, and we're still singing the songs because it is just so catchy. But that is actually a real live Bible story. And these 2 stories are actually happening in parallel. We're going to take the story this morning from a book of the Bible called Genesis, which is the first book of the Bible. And when we're reading it, we're in the middle of Joseph's story, and then almost randomly, suddenly, it breaks into chapter 38, which we're going to read from, to the story of Judah, where he's one of the main characters. And it feels completely odd because there's just this one chapter, and then we go back to Joseph. So I'm going to give you a bit of Joseph context so you know kind of like the global context in which everything fits. So, Joseph was highly favored, not only by his father Jacob, but by God too. Joseph was given by his father, this, according to the musical, a technicolored dream coat or a brightly colored coat. He was favored by his dad, and he was favored by God. And God gave him dreams, and in these dreams, he was raised up above his brothers. And so he went to his brothers, and he told them all these dreams. I'm going to be better than you. I'm going to be greater than you. And they hated him. And not just with a normal kind of like, I don't like you very much, sibling, I don't like you. They literally, deeply hated him. And so one day they planned to get rid of him because he was just so annoying. So they planned to take him out and kill him. And then our friend, not so friend, Judah over here came up with a better plan. And he said, well, why don't we, since he thinks he's so superior to us, why don't we sell him into slavery instead? Then he will know his station in life because he will lead a life of suffering and torture. And not only that, not only do we get our revenge, but we get to make a little bit of profit on the side. Everyone thought this was a great plan. So they followed Judah, sold him into slavery, and then Judah took his Technicolor dream coat, smeared it in animal blood, took it to their father Jacob, said, sorry, your favorite child has been mauled by animals. And that is where we pick up on the story of Judah. So I think we can agree Judah is not a nice guy, right? He is not a nice guy. He is not a guy who is after the heart of God. And not only that, but Judah gets married to a Canaanite woman. So, because God had set his people aside in the line of Abraham, they were not meant to marry outside of their line and into various other tribes, because the others were immoral. And particularly the Canaanites had a high level of immorality, and they worshipped multiple gods. And God did not want the overlap of these two. But he went ahead and he did it anyway. And then he had 3 sons with her. And that is where we are going to pick up. And I am going to introduce you to our wild woman number 2, whose name is Tamar. Now, second disclaimer for the morning. I have always called her Tamar, and I was corrected. Her name is Tamar. However, if I accidentally revert back to Tamar, I am talking about the same person, but I will try and stick to Tamar, okay? So I am going to introduce you to Tamar, and we are going to go and read from Genesis 38, and we're going to cut in at verse 6, where we are introduced to Judah and his Canaanite wife and their 3 sons, Onan, and Selah. Here we go. Oh, I do have slides, yes. Okay. Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight. So the Lord put him to death. Oh my goodness, that's quite a dramatic start. Okay, so we know that Judah himself is a pretty awful guy. I mean, we've been told about the stuff that he's done, sold his own brother into slavery, pretended his brother was dead, made profit from things, married outside. He was not a godly guy. How much worse was his son? That God just literally, bling, obliterated him from the earth. You are a bad guy. Goodbye. But this left poor Tamar without a role in life. And this is where we're going to get into some context. Because according to the law back then, there was a law called the Levirate law. Now, the Levirate law was not only for the people of Abraham, for the Israelite people. Everyone in the regions practiced a similar law. And the reason they did is because it was a protection. It primarily protected the men, but there was a level of protection in there for the women as well. So, if a man died without producing a male heir, he was literally obliterated from the history books. It was as if he didn't exist. In order for someone to have their name recorded in the book of life, they needed to have produced a male heir. So what happened under this law is if a man died without producing a male heir, then his wife, and remember, as much as this is hard in our day and age because we don't understand this, the woman had effectively no rights. It wasn't like you fell in love and you got married. She was the property of the family that she belonged to. And once she had been married, left her parents' paternal line, and was married into her new family, she became the responsibility of that family in every way. There was no more any association with her parents' line. So what happened is if the husband died, she was then taken and passed over to the younger son, who effectively acted as a surrogate. So he was supposed to produce an heir, but that heir would never have his name. That heir would have the name of the original man who was deceased. So that was in order to protect the name and the line, and in also order to protect the woman, because without that, she had nothing. She didn't belong to anyone. So it was actually a good thing. So this is the context in which the next couple of things happened. So we'll move on to the next slide. Then Judah said to Onan, "Sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother." But Onan knew that the child would not be his. So whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. Tamar's off to a rather rocky start in her life, would you not agree? Goodbye, husband number 2. No offspring, you're pretty much alone. You're left alone. And what Onan did was actually so awful, because he basically went, I don't care about my brother's name. I don't care if my brother is obliterated from the history books. This is what it is, his bad. Because also, if his brother had, if he'd produced this offspring, then that offspring would have got the double portion of inheritance, right? And in this way, he ensured that whether he had other children or not, that line was, the money was going to come to him. So they were just a greedy, nasty little family. And poor Tamar, I mean, she was basically, he used her body for sex, and then he left her, and that was it. So we'll go on to the next slide and see what happened next. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law, Tamar, "Live as a widow in your father's household until my son Selah grows up." For he thought, he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. And again, from our viewpoint as a 21st century, we might go, oh, what a relief for poor Tamar. She gets to go hang out with mommy and daddy and be cared for again, someone who actually loves her. But this was not the case. What Judah did was the most shameful thing he could possibly have done to her. He basically said, "You're cursed, back you would go. I don't want to have any responsibility for you anymore. I'm washing my hands of you. Both of my sons are dead." But he also didn't even care about the fact that his firstborn was not going to have any lineage. His firstborn was going to be wiped off the face of the planet too. He didn't care. He just shipped her off back. And poor Tamar would have had to deal with huge, huge amounts of shame. So here is where Tamar takes things into her own hands. She's not faced with very many choices, and she knows that her situation is extremely precarious. You see, because she is not the property or doesn't belong to her family anymore, she belongs to Judah's tribe. When her own father dies, that is the end of the line for her. She'll be cast out onto the streets. She has no one to protect her. So she decides to take the plans into her own hands and cooks a plan, which is scandalous as it sounds, was actually technically, legally correct, just achieved in a little bit of a twisted way. You see, further to the Levirate law that I described just now, were there not to have been another son to fulfill the duty, then actually the responsibility lay back with Judah, the father. He was the one who was supposed to provide offspring for his children and supposed to provide for everyone. So, in the meantime, in the story, because we're going to miss a little chunk, Judah's wife dies, and he goes to join his men shearing the sheep. Let's read on. So, when Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear sheep," she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise, and then sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that, though Selah, that was son number 3, had now grown up, she had not been given to him as a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she'd covered her face, not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law. I mean, she's only lived in his household for a couple of years. Like, why would you not recognize your own daughter-in-law? But anyway, he went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." "And what will you give me to sleep with you?" she asked. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock," he said. "Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it?" Because she's a smart woman. She asked. He said, "What pledge should I give you?" "Your seal, your cord, and the staff in your hand." Basically, your identity document. "Please hand it over," she answered. So he gave it to her, and he slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adullamite in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he didn't find her. He asked the men who lived there, "Where is the shrine prostitute who was beside the road at Enaim?" And again, like, she was a prostitute that belonged to a Canaanite shrine to another god. So Judah was so far out of the life that God had intended for him. "There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here," they said. So he went back to Judah and said, "I didn't find her. Besides, the men who lived there said there hasn't been any shrine prostitute here." Then Judah said, "Let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughingstock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant." So what did Judah do? Judah said, "Bring her out and have her burned to death." He is such a wonderful guy, right? I mean, let's forget the fact that he just slept with a prostitute, but no, bring her out and have her burned to death. And his nature is just so apparent here. But Tamar was desperate. She was a smart woman, and she made a plan. So let's carry on. As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said. And she added, "See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." And ta-da! Finally, we feel like something good is going to happen. We're waiting for something good. So here it goes. And Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her my son Selah." And he did not sleep with her again. Okay, so for some of us, like, that's a real anticlimax. Like, there's such a build-up in the story, and we wanted something big. But actually, if we contextualize, what he said was something big. You see, if we look at what righteous meant in the day, righteous was someone who is in right standing with God and his covenant, demonstrating moral integrity and acting justly according to God's laws and will. It signifies more than just being morally upright. It implies a state of being rightly related to God and others. So although this kind of closing line really feels like there was nothing really significant there, actually what he did publicly in that moment redeemed her from where she was, redeemed her shame for not having produced offspring for 2 brothers, reduced her shame for acting like a prostitute. He took it all away. So the story goes on, and she gives birth to twins, Perez and Zerah, and it's quite a horrifying story of like arms coming out and then being pulled back in and another one coming out. It's gory. But anyway, she has these 2 twins, and this story is just not sanitized at all. We have this marginalized Canaanite woman who was used and thrown out by the family who was meant to protect her. She was abused, and she was desperate, and she took life into her own hands. But the redemption actually doesn't end here. It doesn't just end with Judah's declaration of her righteousness and the birth of her twins. Because as the descendants of Abraham mushroomed into this giant nation, the bloodline of her oldest son, Perez, becomes this golden cord connected God's promise of a Redeemer in the Garden of Eden to the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem thousands of years later. And again, this is actually so incredibly significant. I'm going to jump us over quickly to a book in the Bible called Matthew, which is the first book in what we call the New Testament, which documents the life of Jesus. And this is what we read. This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of our friend Judah over here and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Now again, in our 21st century context, we kind of like fly by that, we don't realize it, but there is a woman's name there. And traditionally, a woman's name didn't have any place in a lineage. It didn't matter who the mother was. What mattered was the father. And God recognized her and rewarded her and put her in his lineage. And I think it is absolutely fantastic. So I'm not just here to spill the tea on some like really scandalous and juicy story. At the end of the day, there has to be meaning in all of this. And there are so many different ways that I could have closed off this message. There's so many different things that we could have taken from this. But yesterday, I was asked, how do you feel after telling this story? And to be honest with you, I feel a lot of things. I feel the injustice for Tamar. I feel how absolutely terrifying and out of control her life was. She had no control over her circumstances and the things that were happening to her. I feel how she felt like she was left with very, very little choice. She could either sit back and accept her fate, or she could take matters into her own hands and do something with seriously risky consequences, like being burned to death, to ensure her very own survival. And I'm sure that there are people sitting in this room today who resonate deeply with the things that Tamar experienced. However, despite all the mess that I can feel, I can also feel the hand of God over her life. This Canaanite woman who was married into this family who was supposed to protect her. She went through some terrible things, made some questionable decisions, but God honored her. God redeemed her. Not only did he redeem her in her own lifetime, but he redeemed her for generations to come and made her a part of his big story. From this line of deeply inadequate people, God chose to birth his very own son. And we may be surprised by these events. We may be surprised by the events of things that happen in our lives. We may be surprised by the things that happen in other people's lives. I can also see how if Judah had not sold his very own brother into slavery in Egypt, I can see that God's hand was on the life of Joseph. Because if Judah hadn't sold him to Egypt, he wouldn't have had the opportunity to become the second in charge over the whole of Egypt. He wouldn't have had the opportunity to save the Egyptians and the surrounding nations from a 7-year famine. And Judah and Tamar and Perez wouldn't have had the opportunity to go to Egypt to get food that the brother that they'd sold into slavery, who had risen to this high position. We may be surprised by all of these events, but God is not. God is never surprised. And God is never caught off guard. And sometimes I think reading a story like this or hearing a story like this, we go, well, it's fine because, now we have the perspective of hindsight. But when you are stuck in this messy middle and you just don't know what to do, you can't see the wood for the trees, we can draw this. Despite your mess, God knows you. Despite your mess, God sees you. Despite your mess, God has a purpose for your story and a plan for your life. And more than that, God is actually drawing you to himself. He desires to walk this journey with you. It was never one that you were meant to do alone. He wants to do this with you. He wants your heart. So again, I want to know, does Tamar's story leave you and me with hope for our lives? Maybe you are currently in this messy middle. Maybe you've left a relationship and there's a mess there. Maybe you have a wayward child who's gone drifting off somewhere and you're desperate to bring them back. Maybe you've just been stuck in a season for so long. And one thing led to another and led to another. And now there is this deep regret burning inside of you. But you know what? The good news is you have already been redeemed. When Jesus died on the cross and rose again, his redemption for you covered your whole life. Your good bits, your bad bits, your shame. Jesus covered all of it. And nothing that you could have done or that could have been done to you could have pushed you too far beyond the boundaries of his redeeming love and grace. You have been redeemed. So to wrap it up, when our dear Granny Bubbles shared the family shame with you, do you know I couldn't see it? I saw Sean. And I chose not to take a shame into generations that follow from us. And you know that God sees us. He sees you and me. He doesn't see our shame. He loves you, and he has already redeemed you. Let's pray. Father God, you are such a good, good God. Jesus, nothing surprises you. You have seen it, and you want to walk beside us through this life, Lord. And I thank you for your redemption that covers every single part of us. And I pray that we will walk in the freedom of that redemption. I just pray your blessings over each and every person that is here today and who hears this message. And I pray that you will touch their hearts and allow them to walk a good, good life with you. Amen.